Have you ever seen two people argue, explain themselves, and both walk away convinced they were right? What makes that moment interesting is how certain both people are during the argument. Before either person really stops to think, they already believe their side makes sense. One person feels interrupted, and the other feels misunderstood. And from there, the argument quietly stops being about figuring anything out and turns into protecting whatever each person already believes, even if it's wrong. By the end, both walk away, remembering the moment in a way that fits what they already believed. What that moment reveals is something bigger. In real life, people don't usually decide they're right after thinking it through. They assume they're right first, and then they talk and argue from that position. Certainty isn't the result of careful thought. It's already there, shaping how everything else plays out. That's why two people can experience the same moment and walk away with opposite interpretations, while still feeling like their version makes sense. And you've probably felt this in conversations that weren't even intense. Someone pushes back slightly, just enough to create friction, and immediately you start thinking about what to say back instead of what the other person is saying. It doesn't really feel wrong. It just feels like you're clarifying your idea. And because it feels reasonable, you don't really think about it. What's interesting is that the feeling of being right isn't a logical conclusion. It's something we experience emotionally. It's tied to the sense that our inner world still makes sense, and that our actions align with who we think we are. The mind values that inner sense stability more than accuracy, because stability keeps things predictable and safe. So when something challenges that internal order, the brain doesn't stop to think. It immediately tries to keep you feeling right, so everything still makes sense. That's why being wrong almost never feels like being wrong. It usually feels like the other person didn't understand you, like they missed something important you said. From your side, you know what pushed you to say it in that moment, and why it made sense to you. The other person only hears the words that came out. The other person doesn't have access to any of that. They only see what you said or did. So when they feel certain about their side, it feels shallow to you, like they're missing something important. And at the same time, your own certainty feels stronger, because you remember exactly what led you there. This is where conversations start to break down. Not because people are stubborn or trying to win, but because both sides are reacting from their own experience. Each person feels reasonable from where they're standing, and no one thinks they're lying or being unfair. They're just responding from inside their own head. And once that feeling sets in, the conversation changes. The person who starts explaining ends up doing most of the work. They think faster and talk more, choosing words carefully, trying to make sure everything sounds right. And without realizing it, they've taken on the role of defending their position. The other person doesn't need to do much after that. They can stay quiet and interrupt whenever they want. The balance has already shifted, and people pick up on this immediately, even if they can't explain it. When someone seems relaxed, we read that as confidence, and when someone is trying hard, we read that as uncertainty. That's why some conversations feel exhausting afterward, even when nothing aggressive happened. You walk away replaying it in your head, wondering why it mattered so much. You weren't yelling or arguing, but you were constantly thinking and over-explaining yourself, and that takes energy. What makes this confusing is that we're taught that explaining ourselves is good communication, and in many situations, it is, when the goal is understanding each other. But not every conversation is about understanding. Sometimes the tension isn't about what's true, it's about who's reacting and who isn't. There's a difference between sharing information and protecting a belief. When you feel right, you're not just holding an opinion, you're trying to keep things from falling apart internally. And that's why silence can feel uncomfortable. Silence gives the other person space to interpret what happened, and most people don't trust that space. Some people don't rush to fill it, and it's not because they're smarter or more dominant. It's because they don't feel the same urgency to defend themselves. They don't treat disagreement as a threat. They let the moment sit, and that alone changes how the conversation feels. When someone responds to a statement with a calm question instead of an explanation, the effort shifts. The person who made the claim has to slow down and explain what they meant. The focus moves away from defending and toward thinking. Nothing confrontational happens, but the conversation feels different. That works because it removes pressure. Most conversations are built on quick reactions, and people usually expect agreement or a pushback. They don't expect silence, and when silence shows up, things slow down, the tension drops, and the need to prove something fades. That's why people who communicate this way often seem confident without trying to be. They're not rushing to settle things. They're just not desperate to be understood immediately. They're comfortable letting the moment play out. There's also something personal that happens when you stop reacting automatically. You stop needing every conversation to confirm that you're right. You stop feeling threatened by being misunderstood for a moment, and you realize that uncertainty doesn't actually harm you. Over time, people who constantly rush to explain feel drained after conversations. Not because they care too much, but because they carry too much of the interaction themselves. They're present, but they're doing all the work. So maybe the real issue isn't disagreement. It's how fast we trust the feeling of being right, how quickly we act on it without stopping to ask ourselves where it came from. Feeling right is comfortable, and it keeps everything stable. Questioning that feeling takes patience. It takes letting things stay unresolved a little longer. And that's where control actually comes from. Not from saying more or proving a point, but from choosing when not to react. From knowing that silence isn't weakness and space isn't loss. Everyone feels right, right, but that's not a flaw. It's how the mind keeps things steady. The difference is what you do once you notice it. The most grounded response usually is to pause and trust that you don't need to fix it right away. And often, that's enough.